They didn't even look me in the eye. One moment, I was preparing final notes for a merger presentation worth billions. The next, the door slammed open, and the new CEO barged in with a sheet of paper dangling from his hand like it was garbage. He dropped it on the desk in front of me. 2 words jumped out: termination notice. No explanation, no handshake, no thank you for 17 years of loyalty. Just cold ink on white paper, dated exactly 48 hours before my annual bonus would have been paid. 48 hours before a promise worth nearly $1 million. I sat frozen, hearing his words echo, effectively, immediately. My chest felt tight, my hands still on the keyboard, half-typed commands blinking back at me. My mind kept racing. Was this punishment? Was it politics? Or was it just arrogance from someone who thought I was replaceable? The room was quiet, except for the faint hum of the server systems I had built line by line. I wanted to shout, to slam my fist on the desk, but I didn't. I stayed silent, even as he smirked, already believing he had won. That silence, the one they mistook for defeat, would turn out to be my sharpest weapon. They had no idea what was really set in motion the moment he handed me that notice. Before I share how everything unfolded, where are you listening from? And tell me honestly, have you ever been treated like you were disposable, even after giving everything you had? Leave a comment if this hits close to home. Your story might just remind someone else they're not alone. 17 years is a long time to give to one company. For most of my adult life, TitanCore Technologies was more than just a workplace. It was the place where I poured in my energy, my late nights, and pieces of myself I can never get back. I wasn't the loudest in the room. I wasn't the one fighting for the spotlight. I was the one staying late, fixing the bugs no one else could even trace. The one answering emergency calls at 2 a.m. when entire systems were on the verge of collapse. I still remember the smell of stale coffee in the server room, the way my eyes burned from staring at endless lines of code. And yet, in those moments, I felt alive. Because every time I patched a hole, every time I pushed a stable update, I knew the company was standing because I had built something strong enough to hold. People rarely noticed. When quarterly meetings came, the executives celebrated numbers, not names. I'd sit in the back listening to polished speeches about growth and innovation, while the software that kept it all together quietly bore my digital signature hidden in the architecture. My fingerprints were there, not on the slides, but deep inside the system itself. Once in a while, someone would slip up and say, "We don't know how she did it, but she fixed it." That was the closest I ever got to recognition. And honestly, I told myself it was enough. I convinced myself that loyalty would be rewarded one day, that my silence, my humility would be seen as strength. But the truth is, silence is easy to take advantage of. People start to believe you'll never push back, that you'll always stay in the shadows. And maybe that's why Ethan thought he could just throw me away like an old file without realizing what those shadows were hiding. Back when TitanCore was still young, there was a man who carried himself with a kind of quiet gravity, William Hale, the company's founder. He wasn't like the executives who came after him. He was direct, sharp, and perhaps a little stubborn, but he believed in building things that lasted. I first met him properly at a small dinner. No cameras, no investors, just the two of us sitting across from each other at a worn oak table in his home. He asked about my work, not in the way most leaders did, but with genuine curiosity. I explained how I structured the code, how I layered encryption, like a fortress, how every line had a purpose. He didn't interrupt. He just listened, eyes narrowing slightly, like he was measuring the weight of my words. Then he leaned back and said something I'll never forget. A system is only as strong as the people willing to protect it. That night, he drew up a contract amendment. It wasn't long, just a few paragraphs, but it carried more power than I realized at the time. He insisted that if I ever faced termination under certain conditions, the intellectual property I had created would revert back to me. It was written plainly, tucked into the dense forest of corporate language. At first, I thought it was just a gesture, his way of telling me I mattered. Over the years, that clause became a quiet reassurance. I rarely thought about it, honestly. It sat there in the background, like a safety net I never believed I would need. Until the moment Ethan shoved that termination notice across my desk. I don't think he ever even read the fine print. And that was his first mistake. Ethan Raines wasn't just a new CEO. He was a spectacle. He walked through the office as if the walls themselves should be impressed he was there. Every step felt rehearsed, every handshake more like a performance than a greeting. And yet, beneath all the confidence, there was something hollow. You could see it in the way he talked, full of big words, but empty of understanding. He loved interviews. Cameras were his oxygen. Within weeks of taking the chair, he was on every business network, flashing that polished smile, throwing around phrases like unshakable merger and unbreakable future. He promised the world. He promised investors that nothing could go wrong. And he promised competitors that TitanCore was invincible under his leadership. But inside the office, we saw the cracks. He confused technical terms, mixing up security protocols like they were buzzwords on a slideshow. He dismissed warnings from engineers, cut corners on compliance checks, and when someone raised a hand to object, he laughed it off. "Don't bore me with details," he'd say, waving his hand as if risk could be brushed aside. I remember sitting in a meeting listening to him talk about systems he didn't understand, pretending he had built what he could barely describe. I stayed silent, not because I didn't care, but because I knew arguing would change nothing. People like Ethan thrived on the illusion of control. He believed power came from volume, from appearances, from headlines. The board ate it up, at least for a while. They wanted the image of a bold leader, someone who could sell a vision even if the foundation was weak. They chose to ignore the technical rot beneath the surface. And I couldn't help but wonder, how long can arrogance stand before reality catches up? Because arrogance always has a cost, and Ethan's was coming sooner than he ever imagined. When Ethan handed me that termination notice, I didn't argue, I didn't beg, and I didn't even ask why. I simply picked it up, glanced at the bold letters, effective immediately, and set it back down. The silence that followed unsettled him more than any protest ever could. He expected anger, maybe even tears. Instead, I stood, collected my things, and walked out. There's a strange kind of power in not giving someone the reaction they're waiting for. Every step I took down that hallway felt heavier than the last, but I kept my face calm. Colleagues peeked over their monitors, whispering. Some avoided eye contact. Others gave a quick, sympathetic look, but no one spoke. The office was buzzing with noise, yet around me it felt like a vacuum. Before leaving, I placed a small USB drive on Ethan's desk. I didn't say a word about it. I just left it there deliberately where he would see it the moment I was gone. To him, it probably looked like a surrender, a final handover of something important. But in truth, it was empty, a prop, a decoy. A silent message he would misinterpret in exactly the way I needed him to. As the elevator doors closed, I caught my reflection in the steel. Tired eyes, steady breath, and a hint of something I hadn't felt in a long time. Control. For 17 years, I had been in the shadows, building their systems, keeping everything together. Now, for the first time, I was stepping away, not as a victim, but as someone holding a card they didn't even realize existed. The lobby was bright, almost blinding compared to the dim offices above. I walked out into the evening air without looking back. On the surface, it seemed like I had lost everything. But deep down, I knew the story was only beginning. Because sometimes leaving quietly is the loudest move you can make. The first thing I did after walking out of TitanCore's building was check the time. 47 hours, 59 minutes. The countdown had begun the second Ethan shoved that termination notice across my desk. He thought it was just a piece of paper. He didn't realize it had triggered something far bigger, something written years ago that now lived inside the company's own systems. That old clause from William Hale wasn't just legal language buried in a contract. It was connected, linked to timestamps, payroll triggers, and digital signatures that I had quietly coded into the architecture over the years. If certain conditions were met, like a termination without payout, the system would automatically reassign ownership of my work. No meeting, no approval, just a clock silently ticking down second by second. I remember sitting in a small cafe down the street, the kind of place where no one asks questions if you sit for hours with a laptop. I ordered black coffee, opened my email, and set a series of timed messages. They weren't dramatic or long. Just precise instructions scheduled to be sent when the countdown reached 0. One of them was addressed to Cormacor's legal team with the subject line, Urgent Contractual Breach Section 14. I didn't need to press a button later. I didn't need to sneak back into the building. Everything was already in motion. All I had to do was wait. I leaned back in my chair watching people rush past the cafe window. To them, it was just another evening. To me, it was the beginning of a 48-hour storm. And as the first email confirmations came through, I couldn't help but wonder how long would it take before Ethan noticed the ground shifting beneath his feet. The first cracks appeared quietly. A legal assistant at Cormacore opened one of my scheduled emails. Just a few words in the subject line, Contractual Breach, Section 14. It wasn't dramatic, it wasn't loud, but the moment that message landed in their inbox, it raised eyebrows. And in corporate law, raised eyebrows spread faster than wildfire. By the next morning, I could see the ripples. A journalist I knew casually emailed me, asking, "Is it true TitanCore has an unresolved licensing issue?" I typed back a single sentence. Ask them about Section 14. Then I closed the laptop and left it at that. No explanation, no details, just enough to plant a seed of doubt. Back inside TitanCore, I imagined the tension starting to rise. Ethan, still basking in his media glow, probably brushed it off at first. But somewhere in some inbox, a reply chain would be forming. Legal teams scrambling, forwarding documents, asking questions they didn't want to ask out loud. And once doubt exists in writing, it can't be taken back. I sat in that same cafe watching the stock tickers scroll across the TV on the wall. TitanCore's name flickered there, unchanged for now, but I knew how fragile that stability was. Markets don't wait for explanations. They react to whispers, to rumors, to even the faintest signs of instability. Every message I had scheduled, every tiny push of information, wasn't meant to destroy them in one blow. It was meant to unravel them slowly, thread by thread, until they were too tangled to escape. I stirred my coffee, calm on the outside, but inside there was a quiet anticipation. I didn't need to storm their office or shout the truth from rooftops. All I needed was patience. Because once ripples start, they almost always become waves. And I had a feeling TitanCore was about to be pulled under. It didn't take long before my phone lit up with an unfamiliar number. I almost ignored it, but curiosity got the better of me. When I answered, there was no introduction, no greeting, just a voice, shaky and rushed. "Madeline, we need to talk." It was Ethan. The same man who had smirked when he slid my termination notice across the desk now sounded like he was choking on his own confidence. His words tumbled over each other, fast, panicked, desperate to control a fire already out of his hands. "There's confusion about the contract, some clause. The board is asking questions and the merger team is demanding answers. Look, if you just come back, I'll reinstate you. Same salary, same position. This doesn't have to get messy." I didn't interrupt. I let him ramble, hearing the cracks in his voice. The arrogance was gone, replaced with something closer to fear. For a moment, I almost pitied him. Almost. When he finally paused to breathe, I said quietly, "Ethan, have you even read the contract you signed?" Silence. Then a week. I don't think that's relevant right now. I couldn't help but let out a small laugh. Not loud, not cruel, just enough to remind him that I wasn't the one cornered anymore. I'm not coming back, I said simply. Not now, not ever. The silence on the other end stretched long. I imagined him sitting in that glossy office, the board glaring at him, his empire slipping through his fingers, one unanswered question at a time. When he finally spoke again, his voice was thin, almost pleading, but I had already hung up, because in that moment, I knew the tables had turned completely. And the cracks weren't just in his voice anymore, they were about to split open across the entire company. By the third day, whispers had grown into headlines. It started with a small financial blog posting a short piece. Rumors of licensing issues at TitanCore may threaten merger. Within hours, larger outlets picked it up. By evening, the company's name was plastered across news tickers in bold red letters. TitanCore stock plunges on contract concerns. I sat in the cafe, the same one where I'd watched the countdown begin, and stared at the television mounted above the counter. The anchor's tone was urgent, her words clipped. Shares of TitanCore fell 14% today amid growing fears that the company's intellectual property ownership is in dispute. The footage cut to Ethan leaving the headquarters surrounded by cameras. He kept his head down, jaw tight, ignoring the barrage of questions. Is the merger in jeopardy? What about Section 14? The microphones pushed closer. Flashes went off in his face. He didn't answer. He couldn't. Inside, board members scrambled. Some wanted to issue a statement. Others demanded silence until they could confirm what was true. But markets don't wait for clarity. Investors don't wait for explanations. Fear is faster than facts, and once panic sets in, it spreads like fire. Watching it unfold, I felt a strange calm. This wasn't about revenge anymore. It was about inevitability. They had built their empire on appearances, on Ethan's charisma and promises. Now those promises were unraveling live on television. My phone buzzed with messages, journalists, former colleagues, even people I barely knew from years ago. Everyone wanted to know what I knew. I didn't respond. I didn't need to, because the truth was already louder than anything I could say. And deep down, I knew this was only the beginning. The crash was public now. The damage couldn't be hidden. But the real fracture, the one that would change everything, was about to happen behind closed doors. The crash on Wall Street was loud, but the real explosion happened in TitanCore's boardroom. For years, that room had been a place of polished suits, polite handshakes, and carefully measured words. But now, it was chaos. Reports filtered out half-whispered accounts from people I still had contacts with. Directors were shouting over one another. Some slammed their hands on the table, demanding to know how Ethan could have let something as critical as intellectual property slip through. Others tried to defend him, insisting the rumors were exaggerated, that I was bluffing. But no one could deny the numbers on the stock ticker. No one could ignore the silence of the merger partner. Silence in business is louder than any denial. I imagined Ethan standing there red-faced, jaw clenched, insisting, "This is temporary. She has nothing. We'll fix it." But I also knew the look in the director's eyes would have changed. The same board that once applauded his bold interviews was now calculating whether he was an asset or a liability. And then came the worst blow for him. His father, Charles Raines, flew in. The man who had greased the wheels of Ethan's career, the one who had whispered in the board's ear to secure his son's position. Even he couldn't calm the storm. Some directors openly questioned whether nepotism had poisoned the company. Others quietly suggested that Ethan's leadership was unsalvageable. It wasn't just a meeting anymore. It was a civil war. Factions forming alliances, breaking. Every voice in that room knew that if TitanCore collapsed, no one wanted to be seen standing on the wrong side. I wasn't there, but I could almost hear the noise, the raised voices, the fear disguised as anger, the sound of a fortress turning on itself. And while the walls of TitanCore's headquarters shook with inciting, I was miles away, sitting in silence, watching the clock tick down, because I knew the board's chaos was only the prelude. The real decision, the one that would decide TitanCore's fate, hadn't even been made yet. The boardroom chaos didn't stay behind closed doors for long. By the following morning, TitanCore's silence had become a story in itself. News outlets replayed the same clips of Ethan brushing past reporters, refusing to answer questions. Analysts speculated on air, asking whether the entire merger was about to collapse. And then the silence broke, but not from TitanCore. Cormacore, the merger partner, released a short statement. Just a few sentences, but devastatingly clear. In light of unresolved licensing issues, Cormacore is suspending the merger process pending further review. The markets reacted instantly. Shares tumbled again, investors panicked, and TitanCore's leadership had no one left to blame but themselves. That same afternoon, I received a call. Not from Ethan, not from the board, but from Thomas Everett, the CEO of Cormacore himself. His voice was calm, deliberate. "Madeline, we've reviewed your position. We believe your rights are valid. TitanCore has failed to protect what you built. We'd like to discuss an exclusive partnership with you." For a moment, I sat in silence, letting the words sink in. Everything they had dismissed me for, everything they had taken for granted, was now the very reason Cormacore wanted me. It wasn't just validation. It was a shift in power. I didn't gloat. I didn't shout. I simply said, "I'm listening." Behind the scenes, TitanCore spiraled further. Ethan tried to spin the story, insisting to the press that everything was under control. But no one believed him anymore. Investors don't follow words, they follow stability. And stability was no longer in TitanCore's hands. The merger that had once been Ethan's crown jewel was gone. In its place stood something far more personal, a deal with me, the person he thought was disposable. And as the paperwork began to take shape, I realized something. This wasn't just about winning back what was mine. It was about taking back control of the future. When the countdown finally reached 0, the transfer went through without a single glitch. My name replaced TitanCore's on every certificate, every legal record, every line of ownership that mattered. What had once been hidden in the shadows of their empire now stood under my control. Cormacore moved quickly. Within hours, the merger with TitanCore was officially dead, and a new announcement was released. Cormacore partners exclusively with Cross Security LLC. That was my name, my company built from the very work they had dismissed, the same work they thought they could fire and forget. Ethan's downfall was swift. Investors turned on him, the board stripped him of authority, and the media painted him not as a visionary, but as a reckless heir who had underestimated the wrong person. For a man who lived on appearances, losing credibility was worse than losing money. And me, I didn't walk away with bitterness. I walked away with freedom. After years of silence, years of being overlooked, I finally held not just recognition, but the power to decide my own path. There was no need for shouting, no need for vengeance in the traditional sense. My silence had spoken for me. Looking back, I realized something important. Revenge isn't always about destruction. Sometimes it's about reclamation, about taking back what's yours, not by force, but by patience, preparation, and the quiet confidence to let the truth do its work. So if you've ever felt invisible, if you've ever been underestimated, remember, silence doesn't mean weakness. Sometimes it's just the space where strength gathers. But now I want to hear from you. What would you have done if you were in my place? Have you ever had a moment where patience turned into power? Leave a comment. Your story might be exactly what someone else needs to hear today.